No, she gave you the bird. Granny gave you the bird.
Ah oui. Parfait. Petra. How many students you are?
How many of us?
Ok, merci. L'université de
Four with us. How many are your group?
University of Favorite. Next nursing. 11 étudiants? Parfait, merci.
My daughter is in RN. Good afternoon, Madam Commissioner. I'm here to introduce you to Natalie Glode, who is right beside me. And I also have Kathy Martin, her support, beside her. And behind us, we have Elder Lottie Johnson, Marilyn Francis, and Lawrence Wells. Mr. Registrar, if we could have the oath, please.
Good afternoon, Natalie. Do you promise to tell your truth in a good way to Commissioner Audette this afternoon?
Yes, I do.
Okay, thank you. Welcome.
So Natalie, I'm wondering if we can start with talking a little bit about where you're from, the community.
My name is Natalie Glode. I'm from Millbrook First Nations. I am one of the adult children of the late Nora Madeline Bernard, who was murdered December 26, 2007. Nora, at a tender age, was sent to the residential school at the tender age of 9. She wasn't quite 10 yet. And at that time, she was mentally, emotionally, physically, and sexually abused. They tried to beat the Mi'kmaq language out of her. They tried to kill the Mi'kmaq in her, which they didn't. Mom was one of the young ladies that took care of the younger siblings, as as she was one of the oldest girls in her family to be there. Then her siblings followed. Her sisters were Matilda, Linda Maloney, Matilda Bernard, Letha Shoppy, there was Lemuel Bernard, Albert Bernard, and she had another sister from PEI. She had a brother, Dunnan. She had many siblings. And I guess there's more out there that weren't accounted for. But she was in there. She said it was like prison. As a young woman, when she left the residential school, the nuns had told her to go and become civilized, marry a man in uniform. So when she left the residential school, that's exactly what she did. She married an army man who was my father, Douglas Eldridge MacLeod, with whom was an alcoholic and beat her severely. On their wedding day, Mom was telling us girls that she even took him in his uniform back to the residential school to show the priest and the nuns, these ones that beat her, that she, quote unquote, became civilized. And she took him there as almost like a trophy, I guess, to prove to them that she was somebody. She was an amazing lady. Dad left us when I was only 3 years old, or almost 3 years old. We grew up poor. She did the best she could with what she had. I always talk about the magical stew pot that she had. I don't know how many bones, ham bones, turkey bones, whatever it was, it went in that pot. And it was always enough just to feed one more mouth with whomever came through that door. Her door was a revolving door. She never turned anyone away. I was born October 22nd, 1964. I was born 2 weeks after my grandfather, Alexander Cope, they say was murdered. My mom went into post-traumatic stress disorder, I guess, depression. I guess I was the blonde-haired, blue-eyed, white child, I guess. And reading through the book of Isabel Tony Shea, there was a part there that she said about when Christmas gifts were taken to the residential school, and very few and far between were gifts brought, but when they were brought, the Indian agent's daughter, who was blue-eyed, blonde hair, got the first pick. And Mom and I struggled back and forth. And after I read that, because I was in school at that time, and I said, is that why? I said, we struggle, Mom? Do you look at me as the blonde-haired, blue-eyed Indian agent's daughter that gets all the gifts? She said, I never thought about that, you know? And I was the child with the big mouth. I was the child that was kind of awkward. I was the child that had learning disabilities. You know, even as a baby, she said I had asthma. She'd wrap me up and kind of put me outside. And, but as the years came along, we began to bond more. And I felt the love that she couldn't give me, she gave to my children, my birth children, James and Danielle, as well as my stepchildren, Frank and Richard, and my foster son, Alvin, which Alvin called her Nanny Timbuktu, because we adopted him through Micmac family, which Mom called the second coming of a residential school, because children should never be taken out of their homes. The parents should be helped to manage. Don't take children out of their home, you know? And anyway, and he was scared of the phone, so my mom told me, she said, when the phone rings, let him pick it up. And so that's what we did. And the phone was ringing, he kind of panicked, and I said, no, it's all right, pick the phone up. So he picked it up, and he said, hello, who's speaking? And that's where Mom got her name, Nanny Timbuktu. He said, oh, Nanny Timbuktu's on the phone. I said, okay. I said, oh, okay. Well, so we'll go see Nanny Timbuktu. So that's how she absolutely adored him. She adored all my children. I gave birth to this big boy, June 8th, 1983. His name was James Douglas Newell Augustine at that time. That was from my first marriage. And he's the little boy that wherever Mom went, he was sure to follow her. He's the one that helped carry the bags and whatever, or when he was baby, and if he was crying too much, and I breastfed him, and if I became empty, I didn't have no more milk, Mom would say, give him to me, I'll give him the rubber soother. So she'd wash her breast up and give it to him, and then he'd fall asleep. And he was like, he was so in love with his grandmother Then my daughter, Danielle, came. She was a very sick baby. Mom would take my breast milk back and forth to Halifax, to the IWK, because she was a preemie. She was the first one to hold her. We thought that she was the only one going to be born, so Mom got to name her Danielle Dawn, and it means God is my judge at the break of dawn. Mom said she had wonderful things. It was 3 times that they had to revive her, and she made it. And Mom said, she's going to do great things in this world. She's going to be somebody, and she is somebody. She's a teacher in New Glasgow. She teaches grade 3. She's got a heart of gold, smart as a whip. When James was born, like I said, he was 9-15. He was the little boy that taught me how to love, because I really didn't know what love was all about. He was mine. I could cuddle him, bath him. He'd go to sleep, and he thought that I was everything, and I thought he was everything. The marriage was bad. I was abused a lot. And I moved with my first husband to Burnchurch, New Brunswick. And I remember walking down the road, and I remember hearing people saying, oh, she's adelasiois, or hones, like raw eating fish something. And they didn't know that I was Mi'kmaq from Millbrook First Nations. I don't imagine a lot of people realized who I was, because the blue eyes, the blonde hair. So, like I said, my kids were everything to my mother. And my James would help her hang her clothes. He'd go to the co-op with her, help her get her groceries. But he always hit her up for $5, or he knew she was cooking some food, and he was going to be the one that was going to be fed first. It was just, if my deuce, if Danielle was acting up, I called it acting up. She was on her moon time when she was a young girl. She get on my nerves, and she said, I'm calling Nanny, Mom. Go ahead, I'd say. Mom would come right up, Mom pick her up, Mom say, don't even look at them, Deuce, just keep going. So she'd take her out and take her home. And then Frank and my Richard and Alvin, she absolutely loved them too. She got to meet my 2 grandsons, Aiden and Colby. Colby was the first great-grandson. Aiden was the second. She never did get to meet my deuce, Ellie. Sometimes I look at Ellie and I wonder, I know Mom, that would have been Mom's sidekick. Sometimes she's got a big mouth and she acts just like Mom. She's there, she does her thing, she calls you out on stuff, she thinks she knows it all. When I'm saying things, oh no, Grammy, this is what it is. And she's beautiful. She's got this long dark hair. She's got these beautiful dark eyes. And there she is. And we call her Boss Ellie. And she sings, and she tries to teach Grammy the Gojwa dance. And she tells Grammy, no, you're not doing it right. You have to practice, practice. Oh, I tell her, my feet get sore. But anyway, she's beautiful. Anyway, no, thank you. So December 24th, Christmas Eve, I took my first grandson, Mom's first great-grandson, Colby, and my Alvin, our youngest boy, down to see Mom. It was Christmas Eve, and I knew she was making stuffing. She always made stuffing on Christmas Eve. So we were down there carrying on, and Colby, which is my son James, that's his son. And James was the one that was convicted of my mom's murder. He was charged manslaughter for 15 years in prison. It was a shocker. When we were standing there, just before I left, and I never looked back. Every time we were ready to go, I'd get them all ready and head out and get things done. And I never looked back, and I never did. But this time, I looked back, and Mom was like, and I'm looking at her, she wanted me to kiss her. So I went back, and then she gave me a kiss, and then she reached down, and she had she took a chunk of her stuff, and she said, "Here, Nados," and she put it in my mouth. And I said, "Oh my God, Mom, that tastes good." And she made the best stuffing ever. Anyway, and then she hugged me so tight, and the little grandson, great-grandson, Colby, come between us. And we were teasing him. We said, "We're going to sandwich you," like put him right in. Anyway, she hugged me so tight, and she said, "I'm going to put all my strength in you, Dos," she said, and she rubbed my back, and she just held me. And then I went to the door, and I said, "I love you too, Mom." And that was the first time that was the last time I see my mom alive. That night, not that night, the next night, she called me. I became sick. I don't know why. I got sick, but I got sick, and I couldn't go down. She was having a family dinner. Anyway, she said, "There's somebody up in the back, Deuce." She said, "I see lights," she said, "flashing." I said, "Call the police, Mom." I said, "Or I'll just come down." I said, "Let me come down." She said, "It's like they're flickering their lights." And I said, "Well, come up here." I said, "If you don't want me to go down there." And she said, "No, I'm all right." She said, "I was out to your sister's earlier." I said, "Okay." And she said, "I like my teapot, or my coffee pot." She said, "But you know I drink Bidewe." And she just kind of chuckled about it. And so anyway, she just said she's just going to get ready for bed and head to bed. And I told her, "Keep your doors locked. Keep your doors locked. Don't open your doors, Mom." But if anybody came to my mother's door, middle of the night, during the day, didn't matter, she would always, always open that door. Because my mom was very loving, kind. She would help anybody. Her house was a place for people to come and sit and cry and talk, take a deep breath to get fed, or maybe have a nap, or take a shower, or just to get a hug, or just somebody to sit and listen. Now, don't forget, this lady grew up, she brought us up 5 girls and 1 boy. She chopped her wood, she carried her wood. A lot of times we didn't have electricity. We'd help her bring in the wood. We didn't have no running water. We had a big basin. And I was one of the younger ones, so we kind of got left with it looked like milk. It was all dirty water, but at least we got bathed up. We had to carry our water from up the road. I used to feel bad for Mom because Mom would say, here I am, a Mi'kmaq woman looking in to my own reserve that I was born on. And I have non-Native women that have band numbers, she said, that are living there with heat. They don't have to chop wood. They have washers, dryers, nice warm beds. Because she used to have to pile coats on us. We didn't always have nice big thick blankets. Before her house was moved up, you could see right out through the cracks. We had a honey bucket that, boy, I'm telling you, you could clean, we cleaned it so well that you could eat out of it. We were always emptying it, cleaning it. Can you imagine having 5 daughters on your moon time? Having pads were a luxury. She'd take all these old sheets and cut them. And every month they were soaked, scrubbed, rinsed, hung out on the line, then folded all back up for the next girl that had to go on her moon time. And if we were lucky enough, because Mom had to work two jobs at a time, taxi driving, she worked for the Royal Native Housing, helping people get their houses fixed when she couldn't even get her own fixed. She helped organize and start up the Native Women's of Nova Scotia. She was involved with the Native Council of Nova Scotia. She was always doing, and she was always helping people. My mother, the late Mi'kmaq activist, born September 22nd, 1935, was one of the largest class action suits in the history of the Canadian government, helping more than 79,000 students. There's nothing in place to suggest that she even did that. And Harper's full of shit. His apology, excuse my language, was nothing. It meant nothing. And I tell you, Phil Fontaine was asked to come to my mother's funeral, but he couldn't come. He said he was too busy with his family. It was Christmas. Who does that? Who does that? They were leaders. They were supposed to be there. They were supposed to help. There was nothing put in place in Millbrook First Nations for our family. There was no liaison person there. There was no emergency response team to put in there for crisis to help us. There was nothing. There was nothing there. But thank the Creator, I had strong family members that stood by me. I had so many people that tried to knock me down. They couldn't knock me any further than I was already knocked down. I was lower. I was lower than Mother Earth itself. I apologized to the nation as a whole for what my son did. But in saying that, I wanted my mother's case reopened because I know there was other individuals that were involved in her murder. It's been the hardest thing to stand up and hold your head up. My mother stood alone for many years. And I know that this big body came out of her body. And she said, the blood that flows through my body came through all of my children. That's how you know a Mi'kmaq woman having a Mi'kmaq child. You cannot become Mi'kmaq through a card. It has to come through the blood, the bloodline. She said, Deuce, I know, she said, that you have blue eyes and blonde hair. But she said, you know what? You're like the bridge that help our people to get over, to make that connection. December 27th, 2007. I was in bed, the phone rang. All I could hear on the other line was, your mother has passed on. I said, what? It was my brother-in-law, Alec McDonald. He said, your mother has passed on. Well, from that moment on, I went into total shock. I remember getting to the van, my truck, heading down and flashing lights, red, clear, blue. They seemed like they were everywhere. And it was so bitter cold, and I had my night dress on, but yet I couldn't feel anything. And the snow was just gently coming down, but I don't know if that was my shock, that everything seemed slow motion. And I remember thinking, this can't be real. And I remember running as fast as I could. And I almost made it to the top of the step when we had an officer that could outrun me. Thank goodness he could outrun me. He could outrun me. Darren Sylvester was his name. One of the best RCMP officers we have. From Membertou. He knew what was in there. He knew the shape. I didn't know. We had thought that Mom had passed from natural causes. We couldn't understand, we couldn't think, we were wrapping our heads around, and we knew that she was going through this commission, for the residential school. There was compensation money, people were getting their monies. And then we knew that there was hate phone calls coming through to her, telling her off, and she'd say, I'm gonna pray for them, you know? Their hearts are hurt, you know? She was always about forgiveness and always about helping people. She said, you know, Deuce, you always gotta turn the cheek. When somebody does you wrong, you pray for them, she said, and keep going. but yet sometimes she would get mad. And then sometimes it seemed like it would take her a little while to get over it. I remember sitting across the street because they wouldn't let us in front of her house. It was kind of all blocked off. And it seemed like there was thousands of crows. They were just squawking, and they were like flying. They were dipping down, and they were like everywhere. It was just like a horror movie to me. And everybody was just bringing me tea. I didn't want tea, I wanted coffee. And I couldn't understand what was going on. I thought, God. So early that morning, the priest with whom my mother and him had words, and she told him off. Anyway, he was the one apparently that was called to go in and bless her. I remember standing out there, and I said, not realizing what I was saying, excuse me, I said, can you go and put a blanket on her to keep her warm? And they said yes. They said, we put a blanket on her and she's warm. And now I know the difference, but I guess to help us along, that's what was said. I seen my sisters, Leanna and Janice. Those were Mom's favorite girls. And I pray that they have some sort of peace. And my sister Gail, she's in Winnipeg. I hope she has some sort of peace as well. We lost our sister Juanita, the oldest girl, almost 3 years ago. She was our sleeping beauty. She was absolutely beautiful. And my brother Jason, he's the one that found her. Come to find out that she was, her throat had been slit. They took my brother into lockup. Because they said they weren't sure. I remember trying to get down to the police station to tell them, what are you doing? Why do you have him there? There's no way Jason would hurt our mother. Anyway, it was about 20 minutes, I think, later, but it could be a little longer. I remember sitting out on our front lawn, and somebody, I don't know who it was, somebody said, you better get up, it's getting cold. I said, I'm not cold. But I didn't realize that was the shock. Anyway, the police cruiser pulled up and my baby brother was in the back, crying, shaking. They put me in the back with him. And he could hardly get words out, just that Mom was gone, Mom was dead. And remember, he's the only boy. So now we're outside, and this woman comes and knocks at the window, and she said, they're saying in Shubby that James murdered your mother. I said, what? What are you talking about? They said, yeah, that's what they're saying anyway. And from then, it was like, oh my God. I didn't know what to say. I didn't know what to think. Anyway, I had to get a message to James, and I know that I texted him and asked him, and I told him, I said, they found Nanny, but she's dead. There was no response. I had to text my daughter, Danielle, in Cape Breton, because she was going to Cape Breton University, to let her know that her nanny mom had passed. She tried to contact her brother, James. He wasn't answering. They were on their way back to Truro. Frank and Richard, they got word that their grandmother had passed. Alvin was in total shock. Everybody seemed to be in total shock that she was gone. How can she be gone? She was our matriarch. The lady that, let's face it, I'm not a good cook. I cleaned, I can sew. She taught us how to make sweetgrass dolls. We peddled that to get our food. She sewed, she made dolls, she knitted, she made lots of looski. When funerals came around, Mom was always making sandwiches and sending them to the family to help with stew. And there was nobody. We didn't have Native Women's of Nova Scotia. Nobody stepped in. We didn't have Native Council of Nova Scotia to step in to offer any guidance. We didn't have a liaison officer or somebody to bridge a path to begin a healing journey for my son James, which I started speaking to him approximately 4 years ago. I tried to hate my son. I prayed that the Creator would take him. When I stood up in front of the judge and I addressed my son, I said, life is life. You took your grandmother's life and you should be given life. But because it was manslaughter, there was no premeditation. He got 15 years. Every time it came up for him to go up for a hearing for early parole, he denied. He wouldn't go. He wouldn't go. He said, there's not a day that I don't think about my gram. My gram was everything. He said, Mom, he said, I was even closer to Gram than you, he said. He told me what he could remember, and it wasn't money that he was after. There was $20 bill still in her wallet. People have written all over the place, oh, it was about money. No, he was racked. It was drugs. There was 4 different drugs found in his system. The people that sold him the drugs, why weren't they in prison too? The trickle-down effect of the residential school system still prevails today. Everything that has happened prehistorically is still continuing. The abuse on women and children. Our stories are not being told, and if they're being told, they're only being told halfway. And we as Mi'kmaq women, we're tough as nails. Yeah, we might falter, but we find a way. I'm doing my master's program at Mount St. Vincent right now. And I have a project going on at my mom's house, which I bought her home. And it's about healing, because there was a lot of people that said, I never had closure. They were used to popping in and having tea, lusky. So I opened it up for one of my projects for my master's degree. And it's every Wednesday. Her little wood stove goes. There's a pot of tea, bidewe. There's, I have red dresses to signify the missing and murdered women and children. And this thing about the Cornwallis statue, that thing should have been down a long time ago. Why can't we have a statue of our strong Mi'kmaq women up there? Not just one, have 2, 3. There's Anime Akwash, Picto Akwash. There's Nora Bernard, Rita Jo. There's the Saunders girl. There's Tanya Brooks, which she used to come to our house when she was little, and Mom would help her. I mean, there's so many women out there. There's, it should be donated, like not donated, but a memorial, something put up there. We were here first. We have matriarchs that were here first. And if we have to have a center, or I would recommend a center in memory of my mother and the thousands that she's helped, I hope and I pray that there's a room put in there for Ben Martin, who stuck by my mother no matter what. Evelyn Francis, strong powerhouse. She used to tell me, Deuce, don't matter what anybody says, they don't have to walk in your moccasins, you don't even have to pay attention to them, She said, don't even listen to them, keep going, put your head up. I've even gone into grocery stores where women have come up and mother of a murderer. Well, I guess, in a way it's true, but, I'm not the first, nor will I be the last. And it's about forgiveness. I had to find it deep within myself and use that basket of tools that my mother taught us all to use growing up. Empathy, honesty, loyalty, love, sharing, truth. And money's not everything. Peace, love, sharing, living off the land. When I do my subbing at LSK in Indian Brook, I see many, many different little people that I just fall in love with them. It seems to me the ones that are the most rowdiest are my favorite. They stick like glue to me, and it's just like nobody else wants them, but I want them. And I try to love them and show them that even with a learning disability, you can go anywhere.
For the benefit of the Commissioner, Natalie, LSK is a school.
It's the Mi'kmaq school in Shubenacadie Indian Shubenacadie Reserve.
You're a teacher?
I'm a teacher, but I'm subbing and I'm doing my master's degree.
So Natalie, I'm wondering if we could go back and talk a little bit about where your mom lived. She didn't live on the reserve, did she?
No, she didn't. She lived about, I don't know if it was 34 feet or something away from the Millbrook First Nation sign. My mom was actually born right on the reserve. Her grandmother and her aunties helped deliver her. And yet, when she turned 16, they took her status card away from her, which wasn't even her status card. It was her mother's status card. So how can they take Mary Cope's band number from Mom when it wasn't even Mom? Mom wasn't legal age to get a band number. And it wasn't until 1985 that she was able to get her status back under Bill C-31. And we still have, and they wouldn't even welcome her back to her home reserve. She had to go on these referendums, and she had to go to these different people, the non-native people on the reserve, and ask them and beg them for their signature, which some of them wouldn't even give. And it's like, how can you do that? Here you're talking to a real Mi'kmaq woman that's got to beg you for your signature. She had to have, I think, a 51% plus in order to go back on. But then Mom and her other cousins and her relatives that were in the same boat as her, they weren't accepted back on either. It became like a personality contest or a congeniality contest or whatever. If they liked you, then they put you back on. But if you didn't do what they wanted, then they weren't letting you back on. But shame on them. Shame on them. We have many women that are living off the reserve that should be on their home reserves and not living in squalor, you know, or feel that they have to always be working so hard. I mean, they're getting up in age. Why do they have to be scrubbing floors or, you know, making crafts all the time just to make ends meet, you know? And a lot of our women, we still have women walking the street thinking that the only way that they're going to make that little bit of ends meet is to give a part of their soul to the devil in order to make a little bit of change to pay for the rent, pay for maybe their kids' things or whatever. So it was like it was hard because when Mom looked out her window, she seen Millbrook First Nations Reserve. How ironic is that? It just doesn't make sense. But that's the government, that's the Canadian government trying to cause the part of the assimilation, the colonization. Mom said, you know what? The way that the government is going and what the traps that our people are falling into, one day there's not going to be no reserves anymore. There's not going to be First Nations. Then the money that they owe us, the government owes us money that was in trust for us that still sits there. And they steal the money out of that to pay for this organization, to pay for that organization, and then the little bit of monies that's in there that they're building, what do you say it when money's in there and it's building interest. The interest money then is given as a little offering here and here and here. She said that money all up there belongs to all of us. But she said, sometime our people, she said, and the males, our males, she said they had to come to us. The mothers, the Grammys were the matriarchs. They came to us for comfort, love, and support. and to get direction of where we should go. And we have a lot of strong men that are misguided.
Natalie, I think it would help the commissioner to understand why your mom was involved with the Native Women's Association, particularly in Nova Scotia. And was there other women that were involved in that?
There was other Native women that were involved in that. There was Viola Robinson, there was Lorraine Cox, there was Clara Glode, there was Kathy Smiley, there was Sarah Glode, Sarah Fittis. Teresa Moore.
They all had something in common. All of
And there
those
was
women.
a Martin lady that Helen Martin was the original one that started.
Those women all had something in common, right?
Yeah, they had their rights were taken. They didn't have homes. They were fighting for our Mi'kmaq women to have stable homes, secure homes. Because we as young children, my cousins could go to the band office and get free school supplies and whatever. We didn't get that. But there was one gentleman, Mr. Paul, he was the janitor at Millbrook band office, and he always called us Nora's girls. So he'd take us after the place closed at night, and he'd say, okay, open your arms up, and he had give us scribblers, pencils, erasers. We thought it was like Christmas. And then off you go right home, you know, so, and for me to be here, I have a very strong husband. His name is Ricky Glode. He's seen me at my worst, and he's seen me at my best. And he supports me 110%. And there's not too many people that can say they have a support system. Plus I have my Kathy, I have Marilyn. Lottie. I have my spirit world that surround me.
Natalie, I'm wondering if we could talk a little bit about the memorial that you talked about. You have some ideas about what you think the memorial and the services that you in your mom's name that would probably be helpful.
Well, I was hoping that there could be a center put up that would be a traditional place for basic needs, to teach our women to keep their families together, whether it be cooking, shopping, cleaning, being a voice for their children, not taking home, not allowing Micmac Family and Children's Services to apprehend the children and take them. They spend out thousands and thousands of dollars apprehending these children, and it's hard to believe that they'll take a child out of a home, put them in another home, but they're going to pay like $5,000 for new beds, new dressers, new clothes, some food, whatever. Why can't they take that $5,000 or whatever, buy them brand new beds in their own home, buy some food for their own home, help the parents, get UNU support, you know? We have allies that are still out there that are not UNU, that understand where we're coming from, and they believe this, and And we have to acknowledge that. I have great professors that from Mount St. Vincent, Dr. Sharp, who he's very knowledgeable, and he tries to listen to what I have to say. In this healing place, I would like for it to be a place that, like a resource center that people could come to, but I'm hoping that they could have it on her property, her late property, and to have an elders room in there, have our elders come in, teach, tell stories, you know, help our women and children, you know, because our young children are going to grow up one day. They're going to be adults. We want them to be healthy, mind, body, and spirit. The heart and the mind have to connect, and we have to help be the stepping stones for them to reach that point. Elders are very important in our life. Even if we could have some rooms there in case our elders need to lay down and have a rest. You know, even if our families need a place to stay, you know, have a couple of rooms, you know. After they opened the door back up for Mom's home, when the keys were passed over, we walked in. The house wasn't cleaned. You've seen the markings of where the footprints went and whatever. As you stepped into her house, off to the left was the outprint of her body where it laid. I went to that spot and I laid in that spot. I put my head down where her head was and her hand where her hand was. And when I looked up, there was a mirror in her living room, and through that mirror, there was a picture off to the wall, off to the side, and that picture was 5 of us girls. So I hope and I pray that the Creator, that's the last thing that she would have saw. Life is a strange thing, and we all have to live it. But I know that I'm not the only one that's lived this life. I know there's many people out here that have a truth to tell.
Do you think you have anything else that you want to talk about? I think you've pretty much.
I think I'm done. Blalio.
Merci beaucoup. Thank you. And you brought me in a space where you talk about all the women, recognizing the women, your mom, a center, having them, was it like making statue, monument of, it would be so beautiful, very, very beautiful. And you mentioned some names that the history of Canada is missing so much, and they would learn from our beautiful warriors, our beautiful keeper of the knowledge or the culture. And when we walk and we see pictures, it's always our men. Even here, our leaders who did the first shovel, and the women are part of the history. And when I was listening, you were reminding us, the inquiry, the people who works for you, that the history, we have to make sure that the women are officially in the history of our different places across Canada. And I say thank you for that. And something that we didn't hear a lot across Canada, it's the impact. Yeah, we talk about the colonialism, okay, that impact. But to say Indianak and to say your mom lost her status, I would like you to explain. We have some Canadian here listening, and why your mom and many other women lost their rights.
They lost their rights because once you marry a non-native, or once a native woman marries a non-native man, then she lost her rights. Or if you became educated, you lost your rights. So, and it took many years, but then you have the Ulnu man that marries the non-native woman, and magically she becomes a Mi'kmaq with a status card. I don't know how that happens. But again, that's the government, a part of assimilation. That's how they're trying to make us to become the same as them. And my truth is that every non-native woman that carries that band number should have them taken from them. They took our First Nations women and they did their status cards, and they did not have one problem doing that. So now they have to get rid of the Indian Act, take those cards away from them, give them to our women that are rightfully so, Mi'kmaq, they're Ulnu. Let them go back home where they belong.
So for you, Natalie, that discrimination or based on women, because we were women, because we marry out, we lost the status, but it stopped in '85. Do you believe that impact is still going on?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Still to this day, there's the first generation, they got their status, but their children, they can't get them registered. And then they're trying to go back to the grandmother's law, but still, they're still having a hard time getting them registered. Those children should be registered.
Right.
Madam Commissioner, I think one of the things too that we should talk about is not only status, but membership. So one of the things that your mom struggled with as well was membership in Millbrook. So she got her status, but she didn't automatically become a band member, right? Of Millbrook?
Oh, well, when the referendum was agreed upon that if she got 51 plus, then they said they automatically, she would come back to her First Nations, her reserve, her home. And I think she went through 3 or 4 of them, and everyone, nope, nope. And she had 51 plus. But the band council, I believe, was fearful of my mother because she was a strong Mi'kmaq warrior that wasn't going to let things slide under the rug. She was going to bring them forth. And I believe she was going to bring all those cards that were given out to the non-Native women. She was going to see that the government took them, rightfully so. But their children still would be would have their status.
So each time that the referendum happened, the elders of the community presented to the band council, right? Why, that they knew her, how they knew her, and that they wanted her back. Along with, I remember the last referendum, I think there was 3 or 4 women that the elders went and said, these were our people we grew up with and were born with, and we want them to come back. And they brought it to the band council. So I just wondered if you remember how that decision was made. So there was a referendum, and
Mom had to go on the referendum. Mom had to go on that referendum, and by the skin of her teeth, she got in, I think, by 1 vote. The 4th referendum. And there were people that were not happy. There were people that were ecstatic. And she was just in the process of picking out land to build her home.
If I can ask, you say that it is still very there. Give me an example, share, so you can educate the rest of Canada who, for the first time, hear about this legislation, how women were treated under the Indian Act. Today, what it does concrete, the impact on your children or your grandchildren.
Well, I know on our First Nations reserve, the houses go into the males' names. They're not in the females' names. It's all run by male, and we only have 1 counselor, Lisa Marshall, on the board. But we have another referendum we have another election coming up in February, but it'll be the same.
If I phrase it this way, if you're a band member, which is different than having status, right?
Yes.
So if you're a band member, that's the only way you can get a house, is that right?
Yes, you have to be a band member to get a house.
So there would be a lot of women who might have gotten their status, but are still not able to get through the referendum.
They might be band members elsewhere, but living on our First Nations reserve, they won't get a house. They have to be band members with status cards living on our reserve. And you get more points if you're married and if you have more kids. So it's almost like them pushing them into having more kids just to get a house. So.
Merci beaucoup. So my last comment to you. You talked about a center for to teach or traditional with elders. What for you the importance of teaching or giving that culture to our next generation?
It's about healing through trauma.
Okay.
And we've all gone through trauma. This is like a historical trauma, right from the residential schools, straight up through the Indian agents, through the Eurocentric colonialism. I want this to be trauma, living through trauma, the indigenous ways of knowing. That's what I would like to see. We need to know that big fancy cars, big fancy homes, and all that, that's all materialistic. We have to know that the basic of living and loving, truly loving yourself and connecting from your heart and your mind, making that meditation, we have to connect with our spirit world because they were here before we were, you know? Let's make it better for the rest of our people. Let's help them heal. You know, it seems like we've been talking about this for years and years and years. It's like beating an old bush, and it's like the poor thing is all splintered and whatever, and now we gotta revive it. We have to grow some fruit from it.
Ben, merci beaucoup. Oui, how do we say in Mi'kmaq? In Inuit? Welale?
Walale.
Ouais. Merci, Tneshkamatan. You're very strong. Very, very strong. And thank you very much for your message and testimony and your truth.
Walale.
So if we may adjourn.
I'm all wired, sorry. Wait, the gift.
A present, wait. Don't leave without your present.
So each time, I was going to ask my grandmother to explain that because her English is better.
I just want to explain the feathers. Some of these feathers come from my home in Haida, which is, we're about 6,000 miles away from here, that were picked by the matriarchs and that on the land. So I want to say hoa for your story. I actually read and studied a lot of your mom's work on the women's study when I was going to Langara College. So I want to say hoa for sharing her with us too. Hoa.
there will be a break for 15 minutes, and then we will resume the final hearing for the day, which is scheduled, well, it'll be about 10 after 4 or so.
That helps. Okay, we're going to resume. So again, I ask everybody to respectfully turn off phones and pay attention.
Just a second. That includes me. Sorry. Commissioner, I have the pleasure today of working with Becky Michelin from my territory. We grew up in the same area. She's from Rigolet, Nunatsiavut, and is now in Happy Valley Goose Bay. And she'll be solemnly affirming before she speaks.
Great. Becky, did you want to solemnly affirm with an eagle feather or without?
Without is good.
Okay, great. Well, welcome this afternoon. Becky, do you solemnly affirm that the story and the evidence you'll share today will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Commissioner, in preparing for today, Becky has written her statement, so she's going to read from that, and I'll just leave it at that.
Good start. All right. I just wanted to show a picture. This is my parents and myself and siblings. I think it's important when we're remembering our loved ones that we see, you know, there's a face behind who we're talking about. And a loved one. So I'm just going to lay this photo over here. All right. My name is Becky Michelin. I am the daughter of Deidre Marie Michelin. My mother was a beautiful person, inside and out. She was a mother, a daughter, a friend, a family member to many. I know she was loved. I hear people speak so fondly of her. She was easygoing and loved the outdoors. I remember going to the cabin with her when I was a child, and my fondest memory was just being loved. Her friends all told me that she had a great sense of humor, and her smile would brighten a room. I know she had great love for those around her. My mom was shot and killed at the tender age of 21 by my father, who then turned the gun on himself. It was a murder-suicide in my home in Rigolet in 1993. I remember being awakened by a loud bang. I remember after that, nothing could be heard in the dark, cold winter night over the cries of my siblings and I as we were to watch this tragedy unfold. I remember what she was wearing. I remember the blood that surrounded her long, curly hair. I remember shaking her with my tiny hands as I cried, "Wake up, Mom, wake up." But she wouldn't wake up. There were no movements, no breathing, just death. I remember finding my father briefly, who had shot himself after he had murdered my mother. I remember the smell of the blood and the gunpowder, which still haunts me to this day. I remember thinking that my mom had hit her head off the wood stove because my young self could never imagine that something so tragic could happen to my family. My sister and I knew that we had to get help. There were 4 of us children left at the home, but we knew we would have to leave our 2 younger brothers to get help. We walked to my uncle's house and told him what happened. I remember him saying, "You're lying, this isn't true." And it didn't take long for him to realize that this was serious. In Rigolet, at the time of the murder-suicide, there was no police stationed in our small community. The closest RCMP detachment was in Goose Bay, which was 45 minutes by plane. My mother needed help, but help wasn't there. The system had failed her. It has failed us as a family, and it has failed our little community of Rigolet, as it has many other families who face the same battles. My mother was stolen from us. She never had a chance to reach her full potential in life. She never got to experience life after 21. She never got to watch me and my siblings grow up. She never got to celebrate milestones and birthdays. She didn't get to be there when I had my daughter and when my siblings had their children. And she won't get to watch me walk down the aisle if I get married. So much was stolen from us when the system failed our family. It's not all the big things that are missed, but the small things too. When people go on trips, they call their mom to let them know they made it safely. I don't get to do that. I don't get to call my mom to ask for advice or to call for support when needed. It hurts to see everyone with their beautiful families sharing special moments together and creating beautiful memories, when the last memory I have of my mother is lying in a pool of her own blood, lifeless on the floor. When the last words I said to her as a child was, "Mommy, wake up." Losing both of my parents that night was life-changing. Things would never be the same. I remember as a child, I was afraid of loud noises. When most people enjoyed fireworks, I was terrified. I would cry because every time the fireworks banged, to me it was a gunshot. I remember Halloween being fun for those who surrounded me, but the sight of seeing fake dummies on the ground covered in blood brought me back to the very moment of finding my parents dead. I would wake up with nightmares more often than not and cry to see my mom and dad again. Things weren't okay. I had no help to get me past this part of my life. I never seen a counselor. I never spoke with anybody that was able to understand what this done to me. My whole world shattered, and life just went on. I was sent to live with a family in another community after the death of my parents. My siblings and I were separated into different homes, living with different families, and some in different communities. We didn't know each other well after this happened. One brother lived in Goose Bay, one in Riglet, and my sister was also in Riglet. I used to speak to my brother that lived in Goose Bay sometimes, but back then it was long distance, so I wouldn't be able to speak to him often. I remember visiting him sometimes. My other siblings were in Riglet. I never went back to Riglet until 1996. I went down for 2 weeks with my grandmother, who also happened to be raising my sister. I had a hard time living away from my family, and I hardly knew my brother when I seen him. I remember asking which child he was because I no longer knew him. It was in Northwest River that I started calling the family that raised me Mom and Dad. When I moved there, nothing that happened was ever talked about. It was like everybody forgot that it happened, but I knew. I also knew that at some point I needed to try and start over, a new beginning at life, one that I hoped would better me and lead me to success and to fill the void which was so fresh in my heart. At the age of 10, I gotten very ill. I was diagnosed with idiopathic thrombocytopenia purpura. My platelets had become dangerously low, and I would fight with this condition for 2 years. I was back and forth to the Janeway Children's Hospital numerous times within this time frame. After trying all forms of treatment, the final decision was made, and I had a splenectomy. It was within 6 months of recovering from my condition that the sexual abuse started in foster care. Every time there was nobody around, I was sexually abused. The first time I thought it was an accident. It didn't take long before I realized that this was no accident. It happened more and more. I stood there holding back tears while fear overcame my body. I was too scared to say anything. This went on for 2.5 to 3 years. I had written everything that was happening to me in an old notebook. When it was discovered that I was being sexually abused, I went back into the social service system and was moved around from place to place, and I had my own apartment at 16. Police visited to take statements. I once again had lost everything that I had. They just left me there like I was a nobody. All I ever knew was gone again. I used to get nasty messages on Facebook. This was a very difficult time for me in my life. I had now lost my real parents to a murder-suicide and then faced sexual abuse in the foster care system. I went through the court system from the time I was 15 until I was 17 dealing with the sexual abuse case. I ended up losing the case because there was no physical evidence of the sexual abuse. I was emotionally and mentally drained. I felt as though I had nothing left to give. Everything had already been taken. My whole life was a whirlwind of tragedy, hurt, and abuse, and once again, the system had failed me. I spent a lot of time feeling sorry for myself, thinking of my own funeral, because I felt like my life didn't matter. It felt like it didn't matter from the start. I was born just to face tragedy. I didn't see a future. I felt angry and I felt finished. I always thought to myself, none of this would have happened if my real parents were still alive. My whole life, I was brought back to the moments of being loved by my parents, and the moment my whole world was snatched away from me. I spent many nights crying myself to sleep, depressed, angry, and hurt. I still, to this day, wonder what life would be like if my parents were still here. I often wonder if my mother was able to get help. Would she still be here to raise us and create memories? Would life have been normal? I would have had the opportunity to grow up with my siblings and a real family. There was no mental health help from the murder-suicide to the sexual abuse. I didn't get the chance to talk to anybody. I felt like I had nobody to relate to. My siblings and I weren't close. We didn't talk about what happened. It was a very sensitive part of our lives that we were to move on from and brush under the rug. I've always said, my mother is more than what happened to her. She was a beautiful person. She was the beautiful person we were blessed with to call Mom, if even for a short period. I miss her every day. I live day by day without that special bond that mother and daughter should share, and without her to share special occasions with, and without her to grow older with. I miss her terribly. I wish she could have been helped, and I wish the system didn't fail us. At the time of the murder-suicide, there were no police station in Riglet. My mother had nobody to call for help. There were no mental health facilities. My father had nowhere to turn when he needed help. There were no shelters in Riglet for my mom to go to, and there were no social workers to help my siblings and I. After this happened, we never got to speak with counselors or social workers to help deal with the aftermath of what had happened. We were to pick up the pieces and move on ourselves. The lack of resources for the Aboriginal communities has a lot to do with the suffering that families go through. Because many northern families face geographic barriers and inadequate funding, many services are not accessible in these northern communities. Therefore, residents have to leave their hometown to receive the help they need. Many men face intergenerational trauma, leading to living high-risk lifestyles and more likely to partake in riskier behaviors. Many men that are behind these cases have faced and deal with unresolved trauma themselves, this being one of the root causes of violence against women. We need to make more resources available for these men to get help, whether it be rehabilitation for substance abuse, counseling for mental health issues, or a program for younger men to show them how to cope with trauma. If we can help the men who live these high-risk lifestyles, we can better help the women by helping fix the root of the problem. Abuse, counseling for mental health issues, or a program for younger men to show them how to cope with trauma. If we can help the men who live these high-risk lifestyles, we can better help the women by helping fix the root of the problem. So in my recommendations, I recommended more safe houses, more funding for awareness programs, more programs for youth to teach coping skills and awareness and warning signs and red flags, and what to do if you should find yourself in crisis. More rehabilitation services within the region, more mental health services available within the Aboriginal communities, translators for 911 calls, because if you only speak Inuktitut and you call 911, you're getting somebody English. Social workers and counselors available to help deal with the aftermath of trauma. Better protocol for those who experience trauma with an initial visit and follow-up and later appointments. I just wanted to say that I'm doing well now. My boyfriend and I have been together for 10 years. We have a beautiful daughter named Mackenzie. She's 8 years old. And I'm an LPN, and I'm hoping to, when I get enough hours at my job, to do the post-LPN BN program. So that's just some of my goals. And you know, life gets better.
I don't have any follow-up, Commissioner. I don't know if you have questions.
Do you mind if I ask you a couple of questions? There's a couple of photos on the monitor, well, behind you and behind me, I think. Do you want to talk about those photos, explain them a bit?
Pardon?
Do you want to talk about and explain those photos?
This photo was taken, I was approached by the Observer magazine, and they had asked me to submit a few photos to go with my story. So I sent in a bunch of photos, and I think that might have been one they chose. And that picture is my mother. I assume it's my sister because she's the one that got all the photos. And this here photo, that's the only family photo I have of us all together. And, you know, I try to keep it close.
How long before your mother was killed was this photo taken?
I don't actually know, but it wasn't too long before. Because we, in that photo, look around the ages that this happened.
You were saying at the time in Riglet there was no police. There's, you know, people listening and watching who have no idea where Riglet is, or can you describe Riglet at the time?
It's a very remote community of, I would say, less than 500 people. At the time, there was no RCMP officers. My mother called for help numerous times that day, but they wouldn't send the police until something actually happened, from what I was told.
And where would she have called the police? In Goose Bay?
Yeah.
Okay.
So they would have had to fly into Riglet.
What other services were there? You said there were no social services. All those services.
You had to travel outside to get access to any of the help.
So when your parents, after they died and the social services got involved, it was social services from Goose Bay?
Yeah.
And why was it, how was it decided that you guys would be in care and would go to these different communities? Was your family involved at all in that? Or?
I'm not really sure how we ended up where we ended up. I think they wanted to keep us all together, but my aunt was adamant that she wanted my brother. So we just went after. My grandmother did take us for a little while, but she had my sister and her daughter as well, we were all really close in age, and I can imagine having 3 young children running around same age. So.
I've been to Goose Bay. I haven't been to the other communities in Nunatsiavut yet, but I have some familiarity with the history, and I know that there were a lot of the communities were relocated, and there's quite a history of the impacts of colonialism, and there was residential schools there and day schools, I think. I don't remember some of the names, but can you share with us at all, sort of, you said that your family was failed, that your father didn't get the help that he needed, that your mother didn't get the help that she needed. What was the help that you think they needed?
Well, my mother definitely needed the police that day. She definitely needed somewhere safe to go. And I assume for my father to have done this, he would have had some mental health issues that, could have been helped before it got that far. I think there was just a lot of things that weren't in place that could have been. And I mean, I'm not saying it wouldn't have happened if it was there, but had the option been there, it might not have, and it always, the wonder is always there.
It's been a number of years since. Has the situation changed in Riglet since?
Yep, they do. They have police station down there now. They have the Kirkina, how do you know how to pronounce it? Kirkina House. So that's like a women's shelter. And I'm not sure. I think they might be open full time now, but I know that there's one there anyways for people to get help, go somewhere safe.
And you said when people call 911, there isn't Inuktitut available. For those that don't know, the Labrador coast is Nunatsiavut, Inuit territory. So when you call 911 in Nunatsiavut or in Riglet, those calls are in the community picked up, or how
no, it's I think if you call 911, I think it calls to Newfoundland, and then they send it to the detachment here, and then they do whatever they got to do.
Okay.
But it's all English.
Just a couple more questions. Goose Bay, I understand, is outside of Inuit territory.
Yeah.
When you were put in the foster home, was that an Inuk family?
Partially.
Okay.
Yeah.
Did you have exposure to your culture and language through that time?
Not my language, but I still done some of the things that I would have done in Riglet. Like I still went fishing and out on the land and stuff.
So you were able to maintain some of that. That's good. I don't have any more questions. Is there anything else you want to say or add?
I don't think so.
Okay. I want to. We've met before, and I know you're Nanatil, your grandmother, and I know that you and your Nanatil have been activists on this issue for a long time, and some of your Nanatil's work since her daughter was taken has caused some of these changes, and I just want to acknowledge that. And because those acts and fighting and standing up and speaking out do cause change, do make change, and I just really wanted to acknowledge that. and acknowledge you and thank you so much.
Yes, and thank you.
Do you have anything based on my questions?
No follow-up other than thank you for your story. Thank you for being here.
And thank you for the opportunity to be here to share.
We have a couple of gifts for you. I'm gonna put the microphone down because I'd rather talk to you than out there, but I'll explain them quickly. The matriarchs of the Haida Gwaii Nation, as we started our work after Whitehorse, and wanted to send their love and give strength to families and survivors who are taking part in this process. So I have an eagle feather that I am just the lucky one who gets to give it to you, so, but it's from them. And then from us, we have manik or saputi, the wick for the kulak. Some of that has been gathered, some of it I gathered, some of it our staff gathered, and different people in different communities across Inuit Nunangat have gathered, and I want to give you some of that.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. So I would just ask to adjourn to tomorrow.
Thank you. When we finish, we put out the kulak. Would you like to do that today? You want Louise and me to teach you? At the end of the day, we like dim the kulak, like I don't know what the word is. Put out the flame.